Hello, everyone. My name is Serge Loode, and I'm one of the board members of Restorative Practice International. And today it is my greatest pleasure and honor to introduce Margie Thorsborne. Now, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on whose lands I work, and that's the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'm in Naarm, Melbourne. And I acknowledge elders past and present, their ongoing connection to country, culture, and law. I acknowledge that we all live on Aboriginal land that was never ceded, and I acknowledge the creation spirits of the first peoples. I ask that these spirits guide our restorative journey together. Thank you very much. And Mark, where are you on whose country?
Oh, I'm on Gubby Gubby country on the Sunshine Coast in southeast Queensland, sort of stretches from about Bribie Island up to about Hervey Bay.
Okay.
It doesn't include Gurry, once known as Fraser Island, but yeah, sometimes called Carby Cubby country as well, but either will do, I think. And
Beautiful. And
I'm in my downstairs bedroom, which is the safest place to keep the cats out
ah,
of the road while we might be doing a Zoom. Mm.
Okay, that sounds great. Look, you're already hinting at a few things that I want to ask you about. So, what brings you to Cubby Cubby Country? Is that where you come from, or what's the journey to where you are? And tell us a little bit about where you live and the
Okay.
cats.
Well, I was actually born in Southport on the Gold Coast, but I was an extraordinarily unwell child with lots of bronchitis, ghastly things to do with the seaside climate. And so mum and dad were convinced that the best thing to do was to move west of the Dividing Range to somewhere dry. So we up sticks and moved out to Goondiwindi on the border with New South Wales, and that's where I uh, became well almost overnight again because the air was so dry. I then went to boarding school in Warwick because there wasn't a high school available at the time. This was back when the earth was cooling. And um, I went to university in Brisbane. By then, my, sort of dodgy lungs were all sorted out. And so my journey, I suppose, to the Sunshine Coast was really around marriage. So I was a recently trained school counsellor in Queensland. We called them guidance officers. And I married someone who was already a guidance officer. So he had done his country service, which saved me from being separated from him to go and do my country service. So look, it was really a case of finding two positions at two schools
Mm,
on the Sunshine
wow.
Coast. So we got lucky and we looked at the map and found the spot that looked like it was halfway between Nambour and Caloundra. And we've ended up in Budrum. So we've been here for as long as we've been married, which is 42 years this year.
Congratulations. That's such a beautiful story. And who's to say that work can't lead to love
Ah,
and
exactly.
such a long love. That's really wonderful. Fantastic. Now, this was your personal journey. I think people would be really interested in also the restorative journey. What sparked it, and what were some of the key highlights um, on in your long career of nurturing, I think, restorative practice in Australia.
Yeah. Well, look, it started when I was an employee of the education department working for, you know, back in the day it was called Guidance and Special Ed for Ed Queensland, and a colleague, Mary Hindman, and I were tasked by our guidance superiors to develop a whole school approach to bullying. And so,
Mm,
to cut a very long story short, what we knew was that that punishing bullies for being mean to other kids simply increased the risk of retaliation
Mm,
to their victims.
mm,
So that was how what was at the bottom of our search, but we'd heard through the grapevine that the police in New South Wales, led by Senior Sergeant Terry O'Connell back then, were using an approach which they'd kind of developed from New Zealand's family
mm,
court conferencing
mm,
to keep young people out of the court system, the kind of slippery
mm,
slope to criminality. So um, I actually was working at Maroochydore High School at the time, and we had an incident which was serious, involving three kids who beat the living daylights out of a fourth child. They were suspended. We brought the trauma team back into the school. We realised it was a gang-related issue. We did a mediation between the leaders of both gangs that settled everything down, but it didn't bring that young man back to school because he was so terrified. So
yeah.
um, basically, I organised a meeting because I kind of had an idea we had to have all families in the room.
Mm,
Um, but without knowing very much, and I rang the police and got some advice from Terry over the phone, pulled it off. No one knew that I only knew a fraction more than anyone else. And
mm,
but the outcome was so positive that we contacted the police and said, "Have you ever considered using this process for schools or training educators?" So in
mm.
the end, a bunch of us went to Sydney and we got trained, and that's where the story started.
Wow. That
And
is
yeah,
that is a
I
first
know.
story, absolutely. And I just admire your courage in jumping in, like you said, without having much more knowledge than the people in the room
Mm.
and guiding them through a really difficult conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think, Serge, I've just been game to do stuff.
Mm,
Didn't think, oh my God, this could go pear-shaped. I just did it.
yeah.
Taking the risk, I couldn't see any harm really in bringing people together to
Mm,
talk about a difficult
mm,
thing, and it was, transformative, really.
yeah.
So I guess what happened next was once we got the training, we ended up getting some funding from both the federal and state government. We had a 12-month trial, which was extended to 2 years, and started the business really
Mm,
at the
mm,
pointy end of
yeah.
what happens in schools. Returns from suspension or instead of. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. Look, I think it's extraordinary. It speaks to the courage when we have the courage to bring people into that room, when we work with them to design processes that unlock these important conversations, then transformation can happen. Now, given your decades of experience, your the books that you've written, the advocacy that you have engaged in, the international work that you are well known for. Can you give us just a couple more examples from that experience? I think you've already starting to highlight the power of restorative practice, and what were some of the shining examples that stick in your mind?
Well, I guess, well, it's hard. It's really hard to pick out one, but I've also applied, and even while I was still at school, I was involved in staff issues. So one
Mm,
one of the most uh, easily understood and transformative moments was actually in a workplace, and it was in a
mm.
biscuit factory that
Ah,
had
okay. Yeah.
hired a new financial person, whose job it was to transform outdated approaches. And he was a very difficult bloke and
Mm,
very much would be regarded as a workplace bully.
Mm,
And so, look, it was a long story about how I got involved, but thankfully I did. And we ended up with about 30 people in the room. So there were senior people from the company that
mm,
owned this biscuit factory, including managers and HR professionals.
mm,
There were the people this guy had hired who thought the sun shone out of his rear end. And there were also the people who'd been so awfully harmed
mm,
by how he treated them. And and I think you and I both understand that preparation uh, is a really good process. So I
mm,
spent more time on the preparation than I did on actually bringing the people together, which was
mm,
about 5:30 in the afternoon through to 8 o'clock that night. The next day, there was a bunch of flowers for me, and the only time this has ever happened. And the note said, "Thank you for saving my life." So I think really what she meant was I had been so miserable. I don't think she was intent on,
no.
doing anything
Yeah.
ghastly, but she had been so miserable at work
Mm,
with no options that all of a sudden it had just cleared the air.
mm, mm,
Sadly, the guy had already fallen on his sword and left the organization.
mm.
But we did hear that he went on to do exactly the same stuff in his next, posting. But the other little bit about that story, which was so interesting for me, I got hired to sit in on the final interview for his replacement. So I was
Okay.
able to
Yeah,
ask
yeah, yeah.
ask him some key questions about how he might resolve an issue like that.
Mm,
And look, as far as schools go, it's really about the moments where scales fall off people's eyes about what these kids have done.
mm,
And that's another set of parents listening sometimes to the pain that the parents of the kid who's been harmed
mm,
going
mm,
through. And those moments of true empathy generation is what is so transformative, but the process has to be so carefully prepared to manage people's expectations of what we're trying to do. And that's not punish, punish people, but hold them accountable, helping them take responsibility and trying to figure out how to move forward. So,
mm.
so the messages are very simple, but getting it to happen, with fidelity is critically important. And that's why I'm still standing, still training, still, trying to get the message out, really. Hmm.
Mm, mm, and you do that incredibly well, and
Thank
have done so for a long, long time.
you.
Um, Looking at the future, where are we heading? What is your if you had a sort of a magic wand or a ball to look into the future, where do you think the field is heading? We're in incredibly difficult times, and I mean we're seeing people struggling in the education system. We're seeing people struggling in the justice system. I think we're experiencing to some degree really a downward spiral for everything. Just the protests on the weekend, the anti-immigration protests all across Australia. Um, where are we going, and how can we nurture hope in these times, Mark?
Oh, look, I think the story about implementation across whatever industry where we're talking about justice or health or uh,
Mm,
education or uh, just about everywhere that gatherings of people, government departments, businesses, the whole box and dice. We've always experienced slumps in
yeah. Mm,
implementation dips. So I think this is a big one. And,
mm,
I'm so happy that you and I have been involved along with the others in RPI in trying to keep hope alive
mm,
because that's what we must do. We must never give up. But I actually I think look, there's one thing that we need to continue to educate people about, and that's the neuroscience of relationships.
Hmm.
And so that if we can do that successfully with little kids in schools, they're going to grow up to be big people who have a better idea about how to manage their connections with each other. But I'm heartened by, and this shows up at our international conferences, the scope. So the scope of people who are mm, experimenting.
Mm.
And I still think because this modern restorative stuff is not yet much more than, say, 50 or 60 years old if we look at
Mm.
the early stuff in the 1970s. So
Mm.
in lots of ways, we're still flying the plane.
Mm.
I'm hoping that kids like my son, who's now an engineer, who's working
Mm.
for a big engineering company, who seems to, probably because he's hung around me for so long, understood how important the relationships
Yeah.
piece is, that there will be this gradual infusion with the next generation of kids. I wonder sometimes if the current generation of parents, particularly in the older age group, we might be a bit late for them, but we can always hope for miracles, I suppose.
Mm.
So environmental work, and I know that you work in a neighbourhood centre,
Mhm.
so that you're available to anyone really who wants to uh, be part of a process of healing. So I guess the messages are about as warm-blooded hairy mammals, Serge, we just need to learn how to live together in peace
Mm. Mm.
and understand how our brains are wired for that way. Now, uh, so the job ahead is huge, but there are more people like you and me doing this work.
Mm.
Every time I train 30 teachers, which is what I was doing last week up in Townsville, there's another 30 people who are taking these
Mm.
messages and processes to their workplace and their classrooms. And, there are other, folk, particularly on our board now, that are
Mm.
working in the healthcare sector,
Mm.
and then the wonderful forgiveness project that Martin Howard is developing,
Yeah.
that works with people in prisons along with the Sycamore Tree program. It's just going to have to be more of the same. So we have to recruit our champions. That's what we have to do. Yeah.
That deeply resonates with me. I think there are so many spaces that we can work in, and it's finding the ones we're already in, or going into those niches, and then with compassion, with care, facilitating conversations, training people. I mean, what you say about when you train educators, that really makes a lot of sense to me when I teach conflict resolution at university. It's every class is a new generation
Mm,
of
exactly.
people, and
Yeah.
we ask them to carry that seed forward.
And look, I know I'm banging on a bit about education, but
Mm.
honestly, the other piece that we've come to understand too is how critical educating the parent community is,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that they can be raising their children with a knowledge about changing their own habits the way they were raised. I mean, that's been my job,
Mm.
not to continue on what our parents thought was the best way to love us, but
Yeah.
they didn't know. They didn't know.
Mm.
We know now. Well, and the next generation will know better even than us. So, yeah, long-term dream.
Look,
But
when I look at my nearly 12-year-old daughter, I think the dream's working.
oh,
It's
that's wonderful. Well, I am a fresh grandmother, as you know,
mm.
so I'm very vitally committed to seeing how these little kids grow up.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
much loved, and there's nothing better than being nurtured appropriately to get your brain to settle.
Absolutely. Thank you. Look, I think we're coming to the last question. We also got to have a little bit of fun. What's your favorite food? You know, I love cooking.
Yes, I know, and I see so much of your uh, photos up on Facebook, and after I've just finished a boring meal, I think, oh my God, I'll just whip down to Nam, and Serge can cook for me. So, look, I've got three things I want to talk about, so they're vastly different. There is nothing like a good lamb roast,
Yeah. Yeah.
particularly the one cooked by my sister-in-law, Barb.
Hmm.
But I also love a good barbecue.
Hmm.
And Mick is a fabulous out there on the Weber. But, and this is a couple of things. First of all, bluff oysters in New Zealand, just
Mm.
I find
Yeah.
like angel food. And secretly, I absolutely love liver and bacon and gravy.
Oh, that's really interesting. My father would have really liked you. He was very big on that in Germany, and yeah,
Oh, so
in
so
that
maybe it's the German influence because, as you know,
maybe it is.
my mum was born in the pretty much the same place where your mum lives at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yes, so I have a wide, I think the only thing that I don't get excited about is choco, really.
Okay.
So no one took me that.
Like I
Yeah.
said, you haven't had it in the South Pacific. There's
Oh, that's
beautiful
true.
dishes with choco. And favorite place to be that is not home. You've traveled so extensively. Where does your heart open up when you return to, or is there a yeah?
Well, the place where I can settle is just sitting on my own deck because we're up in the trees and we have lots and lots of, parrots in particular, kookaburras, magpies, all of that stuff. We also have lots of kangaroos, in our cul-de-sac,
Mm.
which is gorgeous and just love hanging out. But look, locally, if I have people who come to visit from other places, I will take them up to Mary Cancross Park on the outlook looking over the Glasshouse Mountains, and that is kind of boggling to me
Mm.
to see
Mm.
these ancient
Mm.
volcanic plugs.
Yeah.
But I guess, I mean, I love going to New Zealand. I feel I've spent 20 odd years now
Mm.
in the ditch. Last year we had a trip around the islands around Scotland, so that was sort of on my bucket list and just boggling. But I
Mm.
think it's really about anywhere where I can smell the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
get you. Yeah. That's so important. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing with all of us. That was such a pleasure talking with you. That was great.
Oh, thank you, Serge. And I'd love to spend more time with your cooking, to tell you the
Well, I'm sure we
truth.
can organize that.
Oh, thank you so much. This was fun. All right.
All right.
Right.